Black history, for making America great again, to the first Black African American president, Barack Obama. Our history consists of brave civil rights men and women, such as Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, along with courageous women like Rosa Parks, and Harriet Tubman. A journey back in Black history usually begins and ends with slavery. However, is that all there is to it? Is that the end? All right, Israel, if you haven't heard, we, so-called African Americans, are coming up on a major milestone here in the States of being here for 400 years. It'll be 400 years in late August, I believe sometime around August 21st, 22nd, sometime around that time frame. But that is a major milestone, for all so-called African Americans across the state. I mean, this should be something that should be on your radar. You should be talking about at the kitchen table, at the dinner table, because this is something major. I mean, just think about it. When our forefathers came on the shores of this country at the beginning of 400 years, right? At the beginning of the 400 years, and they had the whole 400 years to go through, that to them had to seem like eternity. But here we are at the tail end of 400 years. And I do have to put a caveat out there, because I say, 400 years, that's if, a big if the powers to be haven't, tinkered around with the calendar, added a year here, or taken away a year here, or added a day there or two. I'm just taking it at face value that this is 400 years coming up. And if it is 400 years, this is a major milestone. All right. And just to kind of put this thing into perspective, so if you haven't heard about the whole 400 years thing, and we're actually going to go through this in the presentation, but 400 years ago, roughly 400 years ago, like again at the end of August, there were 20 and odd Negroes that landed in Point Comfort, Virginia. So Point Comfort, Virginia, 20 and odd Negroes. This is how the modern day narrative goes, and I can tell you, we're going to go way beyond that. We're going to go way beyond that. But as it stands today, 20 and odd Negroes landed in Point Comfort, Virginia, and then eventually they made their way to Jamestown, Virginia, and this is where we start counting are 400 years. So 400 years from 1619 brings us to 2019. And if you're one of the bright folks out there that know that, hey, wait a minute, slavery started in 1501. So why are you guys starting your time clock at 1619? That doesn't make any sense. It's way past 400 years, right? Well, I do want to address that. So it has to do with the actual the prophecy itself. So if you have your scriptures, I do have the scriptures on the screen, but feel free to turn in your Bible. I'll give you a few seconds to take out your Bible so that you can read it along with me. I do use the King James Bible because there were brews that were part of the making of this Bible, weren't brews that were part of the making of the newer Bible. So that's just my preference. All right, so once you get there, I'm just going to give you a few seconds to open your Bible, and so you can read along with me. We're going to read about the prophecy of 400 years. All right, Genesis chapter 15, verse 13, and it reads, "And he said unto Abraham, Know of a surety that thy seed, or your seed, shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs." So takeaway here, the land that the seed of Abraham is in for 400 years is not their land, right? It's not that the land was their land, but then somebody else is ruling their land, but they're actually in their land. No, it says this land is not their land, right? And as I keep reading, it says, "And shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years." Oh, hallelujah. Well, the only reason why I'm saying hallelujah is, think about it, Israel. You're coming up on the end of 400 years, right, of being afflicted for 400 years. So according to the scriptures, after 400 years, the affliction is supposed to stop. So something is supposed to happen where this affliction is supposed to stop. Right? So that's another takeaway. We don't know when that's going to happen. I don't want to get into setting dates and expectations around dates, but let's just look at the scriptures to see what the scriptures say. So sometime after 400 years, right, it says that the affliction is going to stop after 400 years. That's what it says, right? All right, well, let's keep reading because we need to know how to count the 400 years. So it has to do with the next scripture, right? Or the next verse. And this is Genesis chapter 15, verse 14. And it says, "And also that nation." So how many nations is that nation? That nation is one nation. Let's keep reading. It says, "Whom they shall serve." So the servitude is a servitude to a particular nation. Let's keep reading. It says, "Will I judge? And afterwards will they come out with great substance." All right. So the prophecy is that the children of Israel would serve in captivity for 400 years to a specific nation that is called out for judgment in the last days. All right. To call out the judgments for the last days. And to kind of skip ahead here, just to spoil the whole thing, the nation listed in scripture over and over again as the nation that will be judged is the daughter of Babylon. All right, so let's back up. 400 years, how do we get the 400 years? Well, we get the 400 years because the scripture says that the 400 years is associated with a nation, or that nation, whom they shall serve, and the Most High will judge. And the nation that the Most High will judge in the last days is the daughter of Babylon. So the United States is the daughter of Babylon. So it's 400 years of oppression in the United States. All right, so that is why we start our time clock at 1619, right? Because that's when the slaves came to North America, to the English states, which would eventually turn into the United States. You got it? So that's why we start from 1619 instead of 1501. Okay, so hopefully I answered that question. All right, Israel. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I just want to put things into perspective. If you were ever like me and you wanted to do some research as to who we are, what's our history, you may have grabbed books like Babylon to Timbuktu, and this is by Rudolph Windsor, and he was a great researcher. He went out there and read all these books, and he put out some great material, but Rudolph, he says something very significant. And I just want to read that to you, just kind of put the times of where we are into perspective. And let's read it together. He says, "Let us return now to the Jews of St. Thomas Island, Scholars are uncertain concerning the exact number of Jews deported to this island. It says, it is certain that the number lies in the thousands and perhaps tens of thousands. Continuous research is needed in African Hebrew history, especially in the excavation of the ruined Hebrew cities of Africa. When this gigantic work is complete, I believe the evidence will reveal information that will amaze humanity. It is my sincere belief that a greater number of black Jews were deported to the western coast of Africa than is admitted by some writers. All right, hallelujah. Well, like I said, I wanted to read this just to show you that Dr. Windsor, when he performed his research, and this was early in the 60s, 1960s, 1970s, when he published his work, when he completed his work and he published his book, he didn't have all the information that he needed to close the gap on our history, right? And the reason being was because it wasn't time yet. We weren't close to the 400 years yet, right? It wasn't time yet. But even then, he knew that there was some information there that, if discovered, it would change the world as we knew it. All right. So that's why I wanted to read that quote from Dr. Windsor, because it was foretelling as to what would be discovered and what we will review today. Okay. All right, Israel. Now it's time for us to identify the people that we are going to search for and look for in our references. We need to make sure that we know who to look for in our references. And for that, we need to make sure we are looking for Yisrael. Because you may come across people that are calling themselves Hebrew and Hebrew only. And you may be surprised to know that Esau is a Hebrew. You may be surprised to know that Ishmael is a Hebrew. And of course, Israel is also a Hebrew. So with that being said, we need to make sure that we are zeroing in on the right people. So we need to make sure that we are looking for Yisrael in these references and in these maps around the world. We're looking for Judah. We're looking for Jews. We're looking for people that call themselves a Judah or Yehudi or Yehud. We are looking for those that call themselves the 12 tribes of Israel. That includes the Black Portuguese. And so with that being said, in these references, we are not looking for those that refer to themselves as Hebrew, Evrei, or Ivri, because it could include Esau and Ishmael. And also, Israel, as we share these references and as we expand our knowledge of our history, of where we came from, of our family and friends around the world. And as we reach out to our brothers and sisters, we need to make sure that anything that they're trying to teach us of our customs, we need to make sure that we're vetting that and comparing that to the scriptures. In other words, if we can't find a scripture, a custom, a naming practice, a name in the Bible, then we need to let it go, Israel. And that custom is not of us. It is not of Yah. For we are the children of Yisrael, and we follow the Torah. We follow the Most High's laws, statutes, and commandments. And unfortunately, just like we have taken on some pagan practices in our captivity, so have our brothers and sisters around the world. So we need to make sure that we vet everything against the scriptures as we reconnect with our family and friends around the world. And we want to make sure that we don't adopt anything that we cannot find in the scriptures. All right, Israel. Well, now that we know who to look for in the scriptures or in these references, we are looking for the Most High Yah's chosen, set-apart people. He is the Elohim of Yisrael. All right, so in this section, we're going to first lay the foundation of who the Jews are. What do they look like? What's their color? What's their hair texture? What do they look like? All right. It says, "You are not Jews," said he. Then it says, Clapperton responds, "No," replied I. "Christian then," says the sheik. "Even so," which means yes, replied Clapperton. And the sheik replies, "I have read of you. You are better than Jews," said he. "Are Jews white like you?" "No," replied I. "Rather more like yourself. Very dark." "Really?" said the sheik. All right. Okay. You can see here in this reference, it was understood that the Jews of Spain and Portugal, especially in Africa, that they were black, right? That they were very dark, that they were not white. Again, these are not my words. What we're going to do here, and the whole angle of this channel, is that we read references, right? And we use the old references. We try to stay away from the new references. We try to use the old references, the references from the 1800s and older, because in the 1800s or older, you'll find references like the one that you see on your screen where it says, no, the Jews are dark. They're very dark. Or even this next one where it says, I'm going to pick this one up mid-sentence. You'll get the point here where it says, "But to love one below himself." It says, "A man without a father, a foreigner, a black Portuguese, nameless Jew." All right, a black Portuguese, nameless Jew. So the whole point of reading this reference is to show you that the term black Portuguese was associated with Jew, right? And we actually have a lot more references to better explain that. But this is just yet another reference to show you that the term black Portuguese is associated with Jew, right? And then even this one, it speaks about the blood of all things. It says, "The nobles of Castile claim to be free from all admixture with the darker blood of Moors or Jews." A proof being supposed to lie in the blue veins that showed in their fairer skin. All right. So again, the point of reading this is to show you that the color of the Jews, or the dark blood of the Jews, was associated with that of the Moors, right? Moors were dark or black, the Jews were dark or black. All right. Let's keep reading. And here's another one. It says, pick this one up mid-paragraph, where it says, "Thus the black color is found not only in individuals as the black Jews of Portugal." Okay, and I'm going to point out the obvious. It says black. It says B-L-A-C-K, right? Black, right? And the reason why I'm stressing that is, if you ever heard from time to time naysayers, whenever we tell people that, hey, no, the Jews of, especially in Spain and Portugal, they were black. And that's what the books say. Sometimes you'll get folks out there that'll act as though a black Jew is synonymous with the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus, right? Like they're make-believe. But the reality of it is, they just haven't read these books. It's been in these books for a long time, well before me or you or anyone that's walking around today. These books have been around for a long time. All right. So black Jews, right, of Portugal. So the key takeaway here is that the Jews of Portugal and Spain, we're going to get to Spain, are black. And here's another one. And this comes from the Memoirs of the Secret Service of John Mackey. This book was written in the 1700s. This reference is describing Daniel, Earl of Nottingham, Secretary of State. You go over to the bottom of the right, he's describing the Earl. He says, he has also the air of business, an application enough to make himself very capable, in his habit and manners, very formal, a tall, thin, very black, B-L-A-C-K, man, like a Spaniard or Jew, about 50 years old. All right. So again, you can see that very black, not just black, right? I mean, not black, but very black is associated with the Spaniard or Jew at this time. All right. Okay. So hopefully we're starting to establish a pattern. So that the hope is that once we get through this section, you will know without a shadow of a doubt, every single time we're talking about, in general, when we're talking about the Jews of Portugal, when we're talking about the Jews of Spain, know that they're talking about a black, B-L-A-C-K person. All right, so in this next reference, I'm just going to try to pick up the pace here. It says, the Jews of Portugal are very dark, right? Very dark. So far we have black, we have swarthy, we have very black, now we have very dark. And here's another one that says, the Jews are confessedly of one ancestry. Yet we have among them the light-haired Jews of Poland. This one it says, the dark Jews of Spain and the Ethiopian Jews of the Nile Valley. Israel, where's the Nile Valley? Is that in Egypt? Yeah, that's in Egypt. So Ethiopian Jews of the Nile Valley. Okay, so we'll leave it at that as far as the color of the Jews, and we're going to move on to another characteristic of the Jews. Now that we have a good understanding of what the Jews look like as far as color, we'll say dark Jews, black Jews, very black Jews, very dark Jews, swarthy Jews, right? We had a lot of different descriptions, but all pointing to black, black Jews. All right, so, but now that we've crossed that threshold, let's move on to something else. Let's take a look at the Lachish relief. And the reason why we're going to this is, so this was like a stone carving of the Jews. So in 2 Chronicles, so in your Bible, if you look at 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verse 9, that's 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verse 9. In that verse, you'll see that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, he goes and he's conquering Lachish. Like, so he's eventually wants to go to Jerusalem, but before he goes to sack Jerusalem, he first sacks or destroys the city of Lachish, which is in the south side. It's in the south side of Israel. This is in the territory of the Jews, right? This is, I believe that's the city of the kings of all things. So Lachish, Sennacherib comes in, he sacks the city. He has his carvers build a stone monument commemorating the victory, right? Builds a stone monument commemorating the victory. And so even today, if you ever get a chance to go to London, you'll see, I believe this is in the London Museum, and this is an expansive relief. What we're looking at the end, this is a long hallway, and at the end of the hallway, this is just one of the plates or the walls or the sides of the relief that you're looking at. And the key thing about this relief is that they capture the description of the Jews as they're being captured and led away out of the city of Lachish. So as they sack the city, they take some prisoners, and you can see the prisoners on the screen. And the first thing you notice is the hair, right? Nappy hair, woolly hair. Nappy hair, woolly hair, right? And this is in line with what we see in the scriptures. Okay? All right. So again, the reason why we're going to this relief is that I want to show you the hair texture of the Jews. Now, notice it doesn't match the hair texture of the Jews today with the long Goldilocks and the long flowing hair, right? It's a different hair texture. The hair texture that was captured, this is in BC of all things. This is in BC. You'll see the hair texture is, all right, so this is in BC, right? This is in BC. Okay, so now that we've seen a picture or a relief the hair texture of the Jews. So we've seen that they were dark complexion, that they were very black, they were swarthy, very dark. You remember all the words, descriptive words that we read before. And then we came here and we looked at the hair texture, and we see that the hair texture is woolly, right? And another interesting characteristic of the Jews, especially the Jews in Spain and Portugal, and I bring this out only because this is one of those little known facts, is that the Jews of Spain and Portugal were known for their poetry with music. They were given poetry with music. And let me show you what I mean. It says, the Jewish poets of Spain not only excel their Moorish rivals, but every poet before, ever since. In other words, the Jews in Spain, they were some bad poets. Like, that's what they were known for. And also, when they gave their poetry, they did it with music. And what does that sound like today? Is that rap? Is that spoken word? Who's known for rap and spoken word today? Come on, Israel. You know what I'm talking about. All right, so that's why I bring out this interesting fact, is that a lot of the things that we would say that's quintessential African American, you'll be surprised that you'll find that in Spain and Portugal just before the transatlantic slave trade. So just before the transatlantic slave trade, you'll find that these black Jews had the same traits, same characteristics of the so-called African American. But let's dig into that a little bit later. Okay. All right. So now that we've reviewed the color of the Jews, we reviewed the hair texture of the Jews, and we even gave you a little nugget there about some of the what they were known for. They were known for their poetry with music, right? Spoken word, rap, whatever you want to call it. Now, let's move on to the movement of Judah. All right, we're going to start tracking the movement of Judah, because what we're going to do, eventually, we're going to end up on the shores of America in 1619. But in order to do that, we have to look at a few things. And the reason why this presentation is different from all the other presentations that you've heard up to date when it comes to 1619 is because this presentation includes the Inquisition and the expulsion edicts along with 1619. Right? And this is, and what you'll find is that this is going to give you that comprehensive look as to what happened in 1619. The reason why the 1619 narrative is incomplete is because modern day historians leave out, for better or for worse, they leave out the Inquisition and the expulsion edicts, and they end up having gaps in their work, and they end up having certain things that they can't explain, and we're going to go over that too. But just want to let you know that up front before we get started, that we're going to look at the Inquisition and the expulsion edicts to a lesser degree. Then we're going to look at 1619, and you'll see that it all plays together. It's all part of the same event. All right. Okay, so the movement of Judah. So first thing you need to know is that in Spain and Portugal, the Jews were in Spain and Portugal. They were there in great numbers, but at some point in time, they started to leave Spain and Portugal because they were getting expelled. They were getting persecuted. And like you can see in this reference, it says the northern coast of Africa and the inhabitable regions inland were full of Jews of Spanish descent. They had congregated there in great numbers during the century from the persecution of 1391 to their total expulsion. Right? So according to this reference, before the transatlantic slave trade, these Jews, remember these black Jews, very dark Jews, very black Jews, they came out of Spain, and now, according to this reference, they came into Africa, right? They came into Africa. And the curious thing is that once these black Portuguese and Spanish Jews came into Africa, then we have maps where we start to see things like Negro land, right? And one thing we haven't read yet, these Jews, they were actually called Negro. That was one of the names of the Jews. And as these Negro Portuguese came into Africa, then we see maps that are called Negro land, right? Negro land. And looking at some additional references, we can see that Negro land actually refers to Jews. It refers to Jews. And we know that, for example, if you look at your screen, this is a map from Stanford University. And you'll see on your screen, I have three names underlined. I have Sojudan, Lamb, or Negroland. I believe this is in German. Sojudan, Lamb, or Negroland. Three names for the same region. So Sojudan, and we've covered this in the previous video, Sojudan refers to Judah. So So is a Hebrew word, H5471, which is the foreigners of foreign origin. And Judan is literally Judah, is H3063, so the foreigners of Judah. And we even cross-checked that using some other documents. The Talmud, of all things, even shows you that Judan equals Judah from the 4th century on. And then we also looked at some books, such as this one that you see on your screen, where it actually literally says the Jews of Sojudan. Okay, and this reference that that you see on your screen, goes back to the name of the Jews, but also we're going to read this reference because it speaks a little bit about how the Jews got over to the west coast of Africa. So in this reference, it says King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And it reads, from these banished Jews, so the Jews that were banished out of Portugal, it says the black Portuguese, as they are called, right? And this is usually where I stop. Because we're talking about 1619 today, I'm going to keep going. And I'm going to read the next phrase here. It says, and the Jews of Luango. 1619. What are you talking about, brother? We'll come back to that. But King John II, he expelled a whole bunch of Jews, sent some of them to St. Thomas and some other places. It says to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And then he says, of course, they're Negro Jews. They're black Portuguese, but the Portuguese word for black back then was Negro. So Negro Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews of Luango. So we're going to come back to Luango when we talk about 1619. All right. So now we're starting to get a good idea that these Jews were placed on the west coast of Africa. Now this is just before the transatlantic slave trade, because this is in 1492. Transatlantic slave trade starts in 1501. So we are less than 10 years before the transatlantic slave trade starts. And we are putting Jews on the west coast of Africa in the exact place that the transatlantic slave trade kicks off from Africa. For example, in St. Thomas in Sao Tome, the very first sugar plantation that all the other sugar plantations that were part of the transatlantic slave trade, the very first sugar plantation, all the other sugar plantations were modeled after, was in Sao Tome, right, where these black Portuguese Jews were sent to, right? And also the slaves that were sent, across the waters over to the Americas, they were sent from the places where these Jews were sent to. All right, so in this reference, again, we're just going to drive home the fact that the Jews were placed on the west coast of Africa. Right now, we're focusing on King John II. Right, King John II. So let's read this one. It says, the first design of settling there was in the year 1486. But perceiving how many perished in the attempt that they could better agree with that of the continent on the coast of Guinea, this is the west coast of Africa, it says, it was resolved by King John II of Portugal that all the Jews within his dominion, which were vastly numerous, should be obliged to receive baptism, or upon refusal, be transported to the coast of Guinea, west coast of Africa, where the Portuguese had already considerable settlements and a good trade, considering the time since its first discovery. All right. So again, this reference points to the Jews being sent to the west coast of Africa. Also, with this reference, and I believe we read this one earlier, but we're going to read it again. And this reason why we're reading this reference again, because we want to understand that the Jews of Spain and Portugal, they self-identified as Judah. This wasn't something that was given to them or told to them by somebody else. No, they self-identified as Judah. And this also was what the Portuguese knew them as. So when Portugal began to write laws to expel them from their lands, or when Portugal started to implement the Inquisition in their territories, they were doing this against people that referred to themselves as Judah. That's important. When Portugal took the children from the Jews, they took who they knew to be the children of Judah. And then when Portugal came to the west coast of Africa, and they dropped these children off on the west coast of Africa, and then the Portuguese turn around and name the slave trade, or the slave coast, the Kingdom of Judah. It points to the people in the place of the Kingdom of Judah being of Portuguese stock. And the reason why I say that is because even today, some of our African brothers will tell you that they don't self-identify, or their forefathers did not self-identify as Judah or Ajudah. And that confirms what we're seeing in the books. Because in the books, it was the Portuguese Jews that self-identified as Judah or Ajudah, right? And it was the Portuguese that then took them to the west coast of Africa and then called that place Ajudah, after their own Portuguese Jews. All right. So I hope I'm not belaboring the point, but just want to drive home the fact that the Portuguese, that they were dealing with Judah. That's who they were dealing with at home. They were dealing with them at home, and they were dealing with them on the west coast of Africa because they put them there, right? Because they put them there. And like in this one, it says, the old writers called it Judah, and its inhabitants were said to be Jews, while the neighboring river Alala, whose real name was Ephra, became the Euphrates. It says, during the flourishing days of the slave trade, from 16 to 18,000 were annually transported from Ajudah, as the Portuguese called this place, right? And then it goes on to talk about the population size. So again, it was the Portuguese that called it Ajudah, and there were Jews in Ajudah that were being sold into slavery. That's the importance of this reference. And again, this reference pretty much says the same thing, where it says Ajudah is a city old, frequented since the 16th century by Portuguese slavers who gave it its name. And its inhabitants were said to be Judaic, and they were indeed considered a remnant of the scattered tribe of Israel. All right. In this reference, we reviewed the Jews being placed on the west coast of Africa in great numbers. We reviewed the Jews who were called the children of Judah, that they were placed on the west coast of Africa, and then that the Portuguese then start name the place on the west coast of Africa the Kingdom of Judah. All right. Okay, so we're getting closer to our point of departure on the west coast of Africa. All right. So let's keep going. What I like to do in a lot of these presentations, I always like to cross-check our findings using additional references or data. For example, so we have references to show that the Portuguese Jews were being placed on the west coast of Africa, and then we also have references that say that the Jews were then sold as slaves, right? So let's cross-check that by looking at some names of Portuguese Jews, and then we'll search the Transatlantic Slave Trade database to see if we can find these Portuguese Jews' names in this Transatlantic Slave Trade database, and that will confirm that the Portuguese Jews were on the slave ships. Right. All right. So let me show you what I mean. Like, for instance, in this reference, it says, if you on the right hand side, it says the Jews of Portugal. It says the Jewish statesman David and Judah Negro. David and Judah Negro. And that's another thing. The Jews had last names of Negro, especially in Spain and Portugal. But the takeaway here is that, so these Portuguese Jews are named David and Judah, right? They're named David in Judah. So if we look at the Transatlantic Slave Trade database that has the names of the people that were actually, of the slaves that were actually on board the ships. Now, these were people that were on board the ships. And we look for Judah, and lo and behold, we see someone called Ajudah, right? Which is the Portuguese word for a Jew or the Jew, right? And then not only that, we see a slave by the name of David, right? So we see Ajudah, or Judah, and David, slaves by that name, were on the slave ships, which was the same name as the Portuguese and the Spanish Jews. But wait, there's more. So in Portugal, there was a famous family, and their name was Yaya. right? And I'm going to read the description of Yaya. It says, Yaya, a Portuguese family in the Middle Ages, members of which were prominent in Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Turkey. So in other words, this family whose name was Yaya, they were known in many countries, right? You go to you mention Yaya in Portugal, they know who you're talking about. You mention Yaya in Spain and Italy, they know who you're talking about. You mention Yaya in Turkey, they know who you're talking about, right? So they were prominent. Not only were they prominent and well known, it says certain individuals of the family bore the additional, it says cognomen, which is the last name. They bore the last name of Negro. Let that sink in. The prominent family, they were called Yaya Negro. Yaya Negro. All right, so you know that Yaya, very prominent, known in many different countries, had the last name of Negro, Yaya Negro. Let's see if we can find this prominent Portuguese family with the name Yaya in the transatlantic slave trade database. And what do we find? Many names, multiple names of slaves called Yaya. Yaya Negro. So you can see Yaya, a prominent name of the Portuguese Jews, is in the transatlantic slave trade database. That is a major, major confirmation of who was on the slave ships. Judah was on the slave ships. Yaya Negro. But let's keep going. All right, so in addition to the names of Portuguese or of prominent Portuguese statesmen being found in the transatlantic slave trade database, what we also point out is that things such as like the bywords, like derogatory words that so-called African Americans are called today, those derogatory words also point back to the children of Judah. For example, the derogatory word that most so-called African Americans are familiar with and other folks are familiar with, Nigger, pronounced nigger, right? Back in the 1500s, 1600s, it wasn't spelled with two G's, it was spelled with one G. And the reason why the slaves were given this derogatory term of nigger is because slaves were sometimes called by the region from which they were captured or taken from. So a lot of slaves were taken from the Niger Delta, which today is called the Niger Delta. So those slaves were called niggers. But when we look at the references, these old references, like this one's called Africa Being an Accurate Description of the Regions. And this was a book by John Ogilvy. And I believe this book is about $10,000 if you want to buy it today. On page 34, it tells us who lived near the Niger River. And it says, many Jews, Judah, also are scattered over this region, some natives boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. All right, so I'm not going to go into detail on this one other than just to show you that it was the Jews or Judah that lived on both sides of the river Niger. All right, and in some of the lectures coming up, we will go into a little bit more detail on that. All right. Okay, so some derogatory names also point to the children of Judah. So far we have Jews of Spain and Portugal. We prove that they are, dark complexion. They're called dark. They're called black. They're called very dark. They're called very black, depending on which references you're looking at. They have nappy hair, as we see in the Lakesh relief. We also see that they were placed on the west coast of Africa in great numbers, and they were also sold as slaves. And then we also cross-checked that by looking at the transatlantic slave trade database, and we saw that there were names of Portuguese Jews of prominent, not just regular Jews, right? These were prominent Portuguese Jews. We found those individuals in the transatlantic slave trade database as well. And then last but not least, we took a quick look at one of the derogatory terms and noticed that as well pointed to the children of Judah. But wait, there's more. So let's keep going. And next, we're going to take a look at DNA. And so if you ever took an ancestry DNA test, it may look something similar to what's on your screen here. And what we're finding that when African Americans take this test, they get a little hit. They get a little match in Portugal. It's not big. It's just a small little match in Portugal, which is what we would expect because the real Jews were driven out of Portugal. just to let you know that if you were to take a DNA test, it would look something similar to what you see on the screen. You may get a small hit from Portugal, right? A small hit from Portugal. And what's interesting about that is when you get a chance, check out my brother Ron Dalton's latest movie, Hebrews to Negroes movie. In the movie, they're going to go over a part of this. So in Portugal, there's a burial ground, right? And this is during the time of the Inquisition and the expulsion edicts and the persecution of the Jews, of these black Jews in Spain and Portugal. Now, modern day historians, of course, they won't tell you that the Jews were black. They won't tell you that the Jews were taken from Portugal and sent to Africa. In fact, anytime they find blacks in Portugal, they always name them Africans. They always name them Africans, and the reason why they do that is because they will never tell you that the Jews were black, right? They never tell you that the Jews were black. But the problem is that when they do that, they start to run into problems when they come into burial grounds like the one you're seeing on the screen. So this is an article about a burial ground that was in Portugal, right? It was at a rubbish dump, and this was outside of the ancient city of Lagos. Now, Lagos was a known Portuguese, we call it a ghetto, right? So that's another thing, that the place where the Jews lived in Portugal, they called them ghettos. So the place where these black Portuguese Jews lived, they called them ghettos. So outside of the ghetto in Lagos, they found a mass grave site. So outside of the place where the Jews lived in the ghetto, there was this mass grave site. And so, of course, modern day researchers are looking at it and they say, oh no, those are Africans. Yeah, those are African. But here's the problem. So as they're doing their analysis and their research and discovery, they found a couple of interesting things, and you can probably see it by looking at the skeleton. So they knew that these skeletons were slaves. They call them slaves, right? And that they said that the hands were tied behind their backs, and that their skulls were bashed in, right? And that is a very unusual death for a slave. So in Portugal, let's talk about this. That in Portugal, there was a mass gravesite. So this wasn't just like one or two individuals. This was a mass gravesite, right? Mass gravesite, with the individuals had their hands tied behind their back and their skulls cracked open, right? Their skulls were bashed open. And if you ever get a chance to go out and check out and read this article, and it says the skeletons come from the site of Gafiria, which is located outside the medieval walls of the port city of Lagos along the southwest coast of Portugal. Used between the 1400s, and the 1600s centuries as a dumping ground. The site also offers up remains of important ceramics and butchers. Dental styles suggest that they may have been of African origin. Analysis confirmed ancestry with the Southern African Bantu speaking people. Okay, let me translate that into layman's terms. So basically, there's a mass grave site right outside the place where the Jews lived in Lagos, and they found these Africans, and their hands tied behind their backs and their skulls were cracked open, and they did the DNA analysis, and their DNA analysis matched your DNA. I'll say it again. Their DNA matched your DNA, so-called African American. Let's read a little bit more about Lagos. It says Lagos was the important Jewish center in the western half of Algarve. All right, so I just want to read that to you, just so that you can see that Lagos was indeed the place where the Jews lived, in ghettos, right? And of course, if you look at the Webster Dictionary, and you'll see that even the term ghetto says a quarter of the city or a place in the city in which the Jews lived. Okay, but the main takeaway here is that in this mass grave site, these people they had their hands tied behind their backs, their heads were cracked open, and so in the modern day researchers they said, well, no, these are slaves. Yeah, they were bringing slaves from Africa, and they were tying them up and hitting them in the head. Right. The problem is that doesn't match up with history. So what the old references tell us about is that this was a time when the Jews were being enslaved, hands behind their back, and where the Jews were being persecuted and killed and murdered, skulls cracked open, right? And the references are very specific as to how it happened. That's why the references match this gravesite, and the references said it was the Jews, whereas the modern day researchers say that it was Africans. So the problem is that the modern day researchers' analysis doesn't match or line up with the references. Okay, so to give you an example, it was a well-established history that in France alone, thousands of Jews were burned at the stake. On one occasion, 160 men, women, and children were bound hand and foot and thrown into a ditch. Okay, and so the reason why I read that to you is just to let you know that when they persecuted the Jews, they persecuted them by bounding them up. But then it says, and it wasn't just a few of them. It wasn't a few. There was a lot of Jews that were treated this way. And let's see, it says, thousands, after enduring all that they did, after leaving their beloved Spain and all their wealth and ease, submitted to baptism now in the hope of being reunited with their children. It says, thousands were sold as slaves, right? Thousands were sold as slaves. And when you think of slaves, they were bound, right? And it says, yet prior to their being sold, they were submitted to tortures, cruelties, outrageous, too revolting, too repulsive, too heart-rending to be here narrated. In other words, they were so bad, he doesn't even want to talk about it. As they were bound up, something bad happened to them, right? And then we have these bodies turn up with these skulls cracked open. It says, it was a most affecting thing to see children snatched from the embraces of their mothers and fathers, embracing their children, violently torn from them, and even beat with clubs. So the practice of when they were dealing with these Jews is that they were beating them with clubs. An example of this can be found in an anonymous painting that I believe it was painted in the 1500s. And in this painting, you can see a couple of things. In the bottom left, you'll see the children or a child being taken. He's in the bottom left. He has a red shirt on. He's being taken away from his parents. And then if you follow a few paces back, you'll see a person with a club. Right? You see a person with a club. And if you go back further, you'll see a person kind of standing off in the middle. And he's actually burning. You may not be able to see that, but he's actually being burned via an auto de fe. And you'll also see that there's something over his head or his face, and that there's blood coming down from his head and his face. Right? And you put two and two together. A gentleman walking away with a club, his head and his face with blood on it. Right? And then you have these grave sites with with Jews with their heads and skulls cracked open. Right. We're starting to see that there's alignment with the references that we have. There's alignment with the references that we have. Okay, so on to our timeline. So we established that the Jews were on the west coast of Africa. And we established that there are mass grave sites that are turning up in Portugal that they're having a kind of a hard time trying to explain. They're calling them African grave sites, but they're actually matching up or lining up with the grave sites of Jews. And oh, by the way, they did DNA on these grave sites and they match your DNA, so-called African American. All right, your DNA. But let's keep going because we really want to get to 1619. So we're going to blow past 1501. So in 1501, and this is, I do want to take some time here just to show you that the Portuguese Jews played a part in almost every major milestone when it comes to the history of the transatlantic slave trade. For example, so in 1501, that's when the very first slaves came over to Americas. However, there was a law in place where the slaves that were sent over from 1501 to 1518, the slaves had to come from Spain and Portugal. Not only did they have to come from Spain and Portugal, they had to have been born. They had to have been born in Spain and Portugal, which meant that they were not African, that they were Portuguese and Spanish Jews. If a person is born in Portugal and Spain, they're considered Portuguese and Spanish, right? Right. So they're not African. So in 1501, because of the law that was in place, the law demanded that the Spanish and Portuguese Jews be the ones that come over, right? But then after 1501, the law, it was relaxed at some point, and then they allowed the Jews to come over from Sao Tome, from the west coast of Africa. Now on to 1619. All right, so transatlantic slave trade first starts off in 1501. The law, as it stands, says that the Jews, only those that were born in Spain and Portugal could come over. At the same time, the Portuguese were enslaving, like, get this, at the time that that law was in place, the Portuguese were enslaving the black Jews. They literally had a group of slaves already in Portugal in 1501. And then they have a law that says, no, the slaves that you get over in the States, no, they got to come from Spain and Portugal. And of course, the slaves that were in Spain and Portugal were the black Jews, right? So 1501, Portuguese Jews were the first to come over. In other words, let me say it this way. 1501, the children of Judah came over, because we know that the Portuguese and Spanish Jews claimed their descent from the tribe of Judah. So 1501, when the transatlantic slave trade first started, the tribe of Judah came over. All right, so let's move on to 1619. So 1619, let's read a little bit about 1619. And it reads, Virginia's first Africans arrived at Point Comfort on the James River late in August 1619. It says, there 20 and odd Negroes from the English ship White Lion were sold in exchange for food, and some were transported to Jamestown, where they were sold again, likely into slavery. Reader says, historians have long believed these Africans to have come to Virginia from the Caribbean, but Spanish records suggest they have been captured a Spanish-controlled area of West Central Africa. It's actually the Portuguese, but the Portuguese were under the dominion of the Spanish at the time, so that's why they're calling it a Spanish-controlled area, because the Spanish were controlling the Portuguese, and the Portuguese controlled the west coast of Africa. All right. So what we've learned so far is that in 1619, 20 and odd Negroes showed up in Jamestown, Virginia. Like, this is usually where the historians stop, right? For example, they don't tell you where these slaves came from. They just tell you that, give you the history that, yeah, these slaves came. They came aboard the White Lion, and there was a pirating ship, and the pirating ship actually took them off of another ship. It was called the St. John the Baptist, and then they took them off the St. John the Baptist, and they took them over to Virginia in 1619. However, let's take a closer look at that. So on your screen, I have a couple of timelines on here for you. And we're going to walk up to 1619. In 1492, King John II expelled the Portuguese Jews out of Portugal, placed them on the west coast of Africa. All right. And then actually in 1536, this is something that I haven't really gone into, but in 1536, the Inquisition started in Portugal. So King John III, what did he do? He started the Inquisition in Portugal. Right? And then later on in 1576, the Portuguese founded this place on the Luango coast called Luando or Luundu. It has a couple of different spellings on it. And then later in 1619, the first slaves showed up on the coast of Virginia, and they actually came from Luando or Luundu, right? Or the Luango coast. Okay? So we're going to go through these. These are the things, the milestones that we're going to address. 1536, King John III, that's my bad boy number 3, he establishes the Inquisition. 1576, the Portuguese established a military outpost on Luango, or the Luango coast, in a place called Luando, right? And then 1619, slaves came from Luandu or Luango and came to Virginia, and this is where we started our 400 years, right? So first thing, let's take a look at King John III. So we want to see what King John III did, right? This is during the transatlantic slave trade. So in this book, it's called America Being, and it has a long name, America Being, Accurate Description of the New World. If you want to purchase this book can cost you somewhere around $65,000, right? And you got to ask yourself, why does this book cost $65,000? And of course, it's about what's contained in the book. So if you go to page 574, and it's going to tell us about King John III of Portugal. What did he do? And it said, King John III of Portugal, this is during the transatlantic slave trade, he sent a colony thither above 200 years before. So now we're talking about the west coast of Africa. It says, though the unwholesome air destroyed. So he sent some people to the west coast of Africa. They died, but he said, for it's not desolate, because he sent some new people there. And it says, who first settled Guinea, all right, it's west coast of Africa. Next in Angola, okay, that's Luango and Luandu, right? The Luango coast, Luandu. It says, and lastly on the island of St. Thomas, that so they might be better used to the air. It says that the said king sold all those Jews for slaves. So it's telling you that the ones that were sent, that this King John III, who also started the Inquisition, that he was selling Jews for slaves. Like he was sending them to the west coast of Africa, and he was selling them as slaves. And it tells us why. It says that refused to embrace the Roman religion and caused their children to be baptized, from whom coming thither in great numbers. All right, the children were coming there in great numbers. All right, so what we learned was that King John III was sending Jews to the west coast of Africa, and of course Angola being one of the places. And that not only was he sending them to the west coast of Africa, is that he was also selling them as slaves. Now this was the king, right? This was the king. Okay, and so let's read another reference here. Now we're going to start zeroing in on the Luango coast, right? And we're going to start off on the left hand side, and it says, a remarkable fact in the history of Luango in the empire of Congo. Just to show you the Luango coast. So Luango coast, you can see there on your screen, right? That's the Luango coast. Let's keep reading. It says, a remarkable fact in the history of Luango in the empire of Congo is that the country, according to a statement which is fully credited by Oldendorf, himself a writer of most correct judgment and of unimpeachable veracity. In other words, this guy knows his stuff. He says, contains many Jews settled in it. Okay, so he's saying that on the Luango coast, what you see on your screen, it says that place contains many Jews settled in it, and that's coming from a guy that has unimpeachable veracity, right, of most correct judgment. In other words, who knows what he's talking about, right? And let's keep reading. It says, who retain their religious rights and distinct habits which keep them isolated from other nations. So they're on the west coast of Africa, but they're isolated, right? They're isolated. And it says, though the separate from the African population, they are black and resemble the other Negroes in every respect as to physical character. It is probably in allusion to this case that Pennington, in his textbook, which is another book, says that the descendants, this is another person talking about the Luango coast, he says, the descendants of a colony of Jews originally, listen, it says originally from Judea, settled on the coast of Africa, are black. So he's saying that these Jews in the Luango coast, and he's saying that they are originally from Judea, right? Originally from the south side of Israel, right? All right, so there's a picture of the Luango coast, right? And you can see Luanda at the very bottom. All right. So far we've read reference that told us that the King John III took the Jews, put them on the west coast of Africa, also put them in Angola, that he sold them for slaves. King John III also established the Inquisition. Right. He also established the Inquisition in Portugal. All right. So in Portugal, we have a couple of different groups of people. Right. We have a couple of different groups of people. We have one group who got expelled. So these are Jews who they know that they're Jews. They got expelled and they were put on the west coast of Africa. So you have a group of people with Hebrew, with the names of Judah. They have the names of the Jews, and they're on the west coast of Africa, and they get put into slavery, right? So these are the guys that came out of the expulsion, right? So that's group one. Group one are we'll call them the kids or the children. They came to the west coast of Africa, and these folks, they were Jews. They had the names of the Jews, and they were placed on the west coast of Africa. And we can actually see these people in the transatlantic slave trade database, because when we look at the transatlantic slave trade, we see people that have names of the Jews of Portugal, right? In the transatlantic slave trade, we see names of the Jews of Portugal in the transatlantic slave trade database. That's one group. But then there's another group. So there's another group that said, you know what? I'm going to become a Roman Christian, right? So they submit and become a Roman Christian, and they live for a time in Portugal, and they live for a time in Spain until the Inquisition starts up, right? Until the Inquisition starts up. And when the Inquisition starts up, you have to keep in mind that these people are a little bit different than the ones that were placed on the west coast of Africa first. So the ones that were placed on the west coast of Africa, they had Portuguese Jews' names, right? But the ones that submitted to Christianity, they became baptized. Their names were changed to Christian names. And this is a well-known fact, right? When the baptisms occurred, and they had godparents. That's another thing. They had to have their godparents, or the people that were going to rear them in Christianity. Then they got their Christian names, right? And so these people who have Christian names, now they're living in Portugal. Well, then the Inquisition comes along. And so the Inquisition starts targeting these new Christians, as they're called. And part of what the Inquisition does is the Inquisition, which is, it has a law book. Like the book that governs the Inquisition is actually called the Libro Negro. Think about it. You have these black Jews in Portugal. They have an Inquisition against these black people. And in the book that governs the Inquisition, which is against these black people, they even call it the Black Book, right? They even call it the Black Book, right? In this Black Book, it talks about the punishments of those that were found guilty by the Inquisition. And the punishment was exile to Angola. We'll read some of it here. I'm just going to read a quick reference where it says, the punishment of whipping be sent to the galleys for the period of from 8 to 10 years. And if a female shall also suffer punishment in whipping and be exiled to Angola or Brazil, right? To Angola or Brazil. So the point of me showing you this reference is to show you that King John III, when he implemented the Inquisition were taking these new Christians who had Christian names, right? So these were formerly Jews that submitted to Christianity. They traded away their Portuguese Jew names for Christian names, right? But then comes along the Inquisition by King John III, and it starts persecuting these people who now have Christian names. And the Inquisition were then taking them from Portugal and placing them on Angola, placing them in a specific spot. Because the Portuguese weren't just all over the place in Angola. They were in a specific spot in Angola, right? So the Inquisition taking these new Christians, putting them on the west coast of Africa, putting them on Angola, right? They're putting them in Angola, as you can see, right? All right, so I'm going to take you to a quick map. And what I want to show you on this map, and you probably can't see it, so I want to zoom in. So near Angola, you'll see a place called Luando. It's at the bottom right, but they're called the Luando Jews. The Luando Jews. And we're going to read about the Luando Jews. So like I said, the Inquisition was taking the new Christians who were formerly Jews that accepted Christianity, taking those guys, putting them in Angola, among other places. And so we start having references start to show that those that were placed in Luando were called Jews. So here's one reference by Alan Godby. He was a Duke professor. And he's actually quoting Livingston. And we're going to read about Livingston here. But Livingston pointed out that those that were placed in Luando were Jews, which matches the Inquisition records. And let's read a couple of references. It says, Livingston considered these Jews to be deportees from Portugal. St. Paul of Luanda, right? Again, we're talking about Luanda, began like Sao Tome as a penal colony for the punishment of criminals. In Portugal, many of these black Jews were considered criminals. All right. So the point is that in Luando, where they were sending the Jews from the Inquisition, all right, it says, also many of these black Jews of the land of Angola, it is said, came from Sao Tome. All right. It says, Angola, it is said, came from Sao Tome. All available evidence indicates that the Jews of the Angola coast were Portuguese Jewish outcasts. All right. So why is that important? Why is it important that the people that were living in Luando were Jews? It was literally a military outpost that they were sending the Jews from the Inquisition. That was their place that they were sending them to. Why is that important? Well, in 1619, let's read about the slaves that came over to Virginia in 1619. It says, sometime in 1619, the Portuguese slave ship, the St. John the Baptist, left the port of Sao Paulo de Luanda, a Portuguese military outpost in West Central Africa, and sailed for Veracruz. And it goes on to tell you that that slave ship was then raided by the White Lion, the privateers, who then took the slaves from the said ship and then brought them over to Virginia in 1619. Right. But the takeaway here is that those Jews came from Luando, which was the penal colony of the Jews from the Inquisition. Let that sink in, Israel.